discussions on the opportunities and ways of integrating ESG principles in our businesses. I would like to share that Citi plans to have it as a more continuous, periodic interactions, so that an issue like this, which is very dynamic yet holds a lot of business interest, should be engaged upon on a regular basis. And we would like to use this platform for a better connect between the experts in the sector and the industry, which today wants to know more about the why and how of ESG initiatives in the sector. I welcome you all to the first in this series, which is themed as an introduction to sustainability metrics for the textile sector. I welcome the ESG experts who are here today with us, Ms. Namrata Rana, who is the Director Strategies and Brand Futurescape, and Professor Utkarsh Majumdar, who is a member Board of Directors IIM Raipur, for partnering with Citi in this initiative and conducting the first session on Citi's ESG series. ESG norms comprise a set of norms used to assess the ethical and sustainable impact of an investment or a company. The environmental aspects, which we all see are of more prominence today, concern the impact a company has on the environment, encompassing carbon emissions, waste management, and efficient use of resources. Efficient, or more to say, minimalizing or optimizing that. Social aspects relate to the company's influence on society, including its compliance with labor standards, respect for human rights, and engagement with local communities. So why is this so important for the textile industry? Because as we all know that the Indian textile industry is one of the largest contributor to the Indian economy in terms of manufacturing, trade, and employment. Hence, given this importance of the sector for the socio-economic growth of the country, ESG initiatives will, of course, holds a huge place in the growth of this sector. The sector needs, while the sector has been growing, the sector needs to keep pace with the global concerns on ESG issues, given its significant contribution, given that it affects the environmental pollution with significant carbon emissions, water consumption, and chemical usage. This brings the need of ESG norms for the textile industry. By adopting ESG principles, textile industry can substantially reduce the environmental impact by reducing the waste, minimizing resource consumption, and using sustainable material and technologies. Of course, we all know one of the important drivers is the consumers out in the market, domestic or international, who are becoming increasingly conscious of the sustainability and ethical issues around the products they are purchasing. India today is well positioned to increase its share in the global textile and apparel market, as it has a strong textile manufacturing base and a good pool of skilled labor. In fact, the government has also initiated a lot of schemes for incentivizing investment, capacity building, especially in the space of the sustainability issues like the technology. So today the PLI schemes, the PM Mitra Parks, and other schemes are all aimed towards this. The industry is ambitious. It wants to grow. We have a very ambitious target, but we want to grow as a responsible and sustainable sourcing destination. One of the major reasons why it is becoming increasingly important is what we are hearing about in terms of the developments in the various markets that India specifically caters to, like the EU. The EU legislations for textile and apparel industry have several ESG principles in them and have brought the urgency to understand them. Some of these are the REACH, which was of course earlier also there, the Waste Framework Directive, which aims to reduce waste and promote sustainable resources, the EU's Green Deal, which aims to reduce the greenhouse emissions. There is, of course, the EU due diligence norms, which would have a serious impact on how we are reporting on our social initiatives, and of course, the EU sustainability framework. There are various others like the EU timber regulations, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and many of which are going to be mandatory in the either in the coming year or in the next couple of years. So all these makes it important for the Indian textile industry, which is extremely integrated to the global world, to understand the requirements and see how we are aligned and prepare well with that. At the moment, the ESG considerations are not mandatory, only for some of them who are listed with SEBI, but for most of the other, it is more to do with the kind of requirements coming from the buyer's market. And also because of a growing realization that the long term sustainability and success in the international market would depend on this. Investing in a new technology is one way which companies can adopt to improve their ESG norms. For example, new technologies can help reduction in carbon footprints, reduce water and energy consumption, and also help in better workplace health and safety. CITI is committed to promote sustainability in the textile sector. Many of you may be knowing we launched the CITI Sustainability Awards. The CITI Birla Awards also today focus more on the sustainability issues. The awards for this year were given for reduction in carbon emission and water management. We also partnering with various other international initiatives in this area. In fact, I'm happy to share that later this month we are facilitating industry interactions on innovative sustainable technologies with some Danish firms under the Indo-Danish Green Textile Pact. I hope today's discussions on the introduction to sustainability metrics for the textile sector will help the participants to understand the existing norms, the benchmarks that is there in industry today in India and globally. And of course, most importantly, we would like to initiate experience sharing and concerns or challenges that the industry faces in this, so that this platform can come up as a platform for discussing how the journey has been for many of us who are the industry leaders, but also many who are planning to embark on this journey. So now I would like to invite the panelists. I welcome Ms. Namrata Rana, who is Director Strategy at Futurescape, a firm focused around circular business solutions and green supply chains. Her work focuses on preparing companies for the sustainability and net zero transition. She works at the intersection of technology, sustainability, and brand experiences. She's an alumni of the IIM Ahmedabad and University of Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. She teaches at various educational institutes and has been a frequent speaker on sustainability forums. Over the last 20 years, she has worked with prominent Fortune 500 brands on building sustainable experiences. Welcome, Ms. Rana. We look forward to your presentation today. I would also like to introduce and welcome Professor Utkarsh Majumdar. He's a professional with nearly 3 decades of experience encompassing teaching, research, and administration at the premier business school in India. IIM Bangalore, IIM Lucknow, IIM Udaipur, etc. And working with large corporations in India like GE Capital, iGate, and HSBC. He is a doctorate from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, where he had worked on the sustainability issues. In fact, that's a space that he frequently speaks on, which also includes corporate finance and sustainability. With that, I welcome both the speakers. Over to you, Ms. Rana.
Thank you so much, Chandrima. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I want to begin my talk by asking all of us here whether we really think that sustainability is core to business, or it is something that we are doing in addition to everything else, and whatever free time and resources that we get to do it. And if the answer for all of us is that it's just nice to have, then I want to change that perception. And that's the main reason that my presentation today really talks about, are you climate fit? Meaning, what is it that we are doing to be actually ready for the new climate. And by new climate, I mean that the business climate is also changing. The, the perspective that we have that, we are going to continue business as usual, that really needs to change because we are in the biggest transformative shift of our times. And this doesn't necessarily mean that we've got to forget about profitability. Honestly, profitability needs to go with sustainability. And that's the transformation that the fashion and the textiles business worldwide needs to make. So what worked in the past may not necessarily work in the future. Our entire processes, our way of functioning, the way we look at non-financial metrics, all that needs to come in and be center stage. At the moment, however, there are many, many challenges that we face. And there are also lots of words that are being thrown around that confuse a lot of things. So you will possibly hear about things such as ESG, brand purpose, circular economy, net zero, sustainability, CSR, linear economy, green economy, lots and lots and lots of words. And this is not comprehensive because there will be many, many other things that you would also be hearing about. But largely, in almost all these words, all we are doing is looking at the same thing from different lenses. So if you look at it from the head of marketing will perhaps look at it as saying that, what is the purpose of the brand? If you look at it from a compliance perspective, they are saying, where is your sustainability report? And that needs to cover environmental issues, social issues, and governance issues, and therefore come together to form E, S, and G. Others will talk about how much waste that you generate. Are you a circular business? Which means that does the waste that you generate come back to the system and get reused and recycled all over again? And therefore, the circular economy comes in. And correlated to that is also the green economy, where you also start talking about not just removing waste, but removing all kinds of emissions from your business, as opposed to the linear economy in which we are in right now, where we talk about a linear system where we actually produce products and services, but yes, there is also a lot of waste that gets generated. Then there is the concept around CSR, which is what do you do for society in addition to running your core business? And then lastly, but most critically, is the concept about sustainability and net zero. Now, sustainability is really what we are doing for the environment and also is part of our core business. Now, that integral nature of sustainability, which means that the business that we do should not have a negative impact on the external environment. And that is the core promise that sustainability needs to bring. And there are organizations the world over who are prioritizing a sustainability first framework. Hence, while there are many, many concepts, post-pandemic, the shift that has occurred is that climate change, the responsibility of brands towards climate, and their own targets on saying that we will be net zero by a certain date have taken priority. So if you look at Inditex, which is the holding company of Zara, they're talking about 91% of renewable energy in all facilities. They're talking about 47% of Joint Life garments, which is their sustainability first brand. Eco-efficient store programs. And as a roadmap, all these goals are broken up into different aspects. On the right, you will also see the code of conduct for manufacturers and suppliers, which is why we are talking about sustainability today. In the context of when we are exporting our own products to international brands, it is critical that we look at their sustainability targets and what are the things that they are buying from us, will buy from us. And therefore, this roadmap is very critical for you and your organization so that you can align yourself to this. Next, let's take a look at what Adidas is doing. Adidas, of course, has its own net zero targets, their own sustainability framework, but they're also talking about innovation. They're talking about a carbon neutral future by creating products that are carbon neutral. And in that context, they've tied up with Allbirds. Organizations like Caring are doing phenomenal work in mapping the data around their entire supply chain and looking at it and linking that up with corporate remuneration. So the executive corporate officers' remuneration is actually linked to the sustainability targets that they have achieved. So there is a vision, there is a strategy, there's a multi-brand model, there's a value chain, there are financial priorities and linkages of this strategy with revenue, operating income, and market capitalization. So linking that up to my first slide, which is profitability and sustainability go together. And obviously, all these organizations now report on what they do. So reporting doesn't really come first. It's the last thing that you do. So the first thing is to set your targets, figure out what you want to do, have a solid corporate strategy, and then talk about your achievements. And this is also critically important in the context of India's net zero targets. So there is this external push from the buyers. India itself also has its own net zero targets, and India is talking about saying that we will be a net zero country by 2070. That was something that was announced by the Prime Minister in the COP. But that's not the only important thing. There are 4 other very critical targets, part of the Panchamrit that the Prime Minister announced, which talk about by 2030, non-fossil fuel generation will increase by 500 gigawatts. By 2030, India will increase share of renewable energy in total energy to 50%. Carbon emission will be reduced by 1 billion tons by 2030, and the economy's carbon intensity will reduce by 45% by 2030. So if you're an Indian brand and you operate in India, the nation's targets also become your targets. So there is a double focus on reducing your emissions intensity. And there are many strategies and business models that are aligning to this. So we do a study of India's top 200 companies in terms of what are they doing on environmental, social, and governance issues. And we find that in 22, 58% of top companies reported that they aspire to be carbon neutral or achieve net zero. But 40% of these who shared a tangible net zero timeline focus on 2040. Followed by 2050 as a target year. Now, this doesn't mean that you've got to only look at 2040 or 2050. What you really need to look at is have a very targeted focus on your own business and figure out what are the things that you can do yourself to actually achieve these targets. A large number of companies that we focus on also have decarbonization measures. Almost 80% of the top 200 companies have these decarbonization measures. And what does this entail? It entails energy efficiency programs, using renewable energy, other techniques to reduce emissions, waste management, carbon credits, many other things. Now, the most difficult problem is managing the supply chain issues. So decarbonization measures for yourself within the organization, and the people that we speak to are the large organizations. For them to look at it within themselves is an easier task rather than looking at it as part of a supply chain problem. Now, that is where a lot of focus is going into these days. So programs to help reduce GHG emissions in value chain is a very big focus. So are Indian companies ready for climate change? Meaning that at one level, we said that so many of the top companies are looking at decarbonization, they have targets. So are we going to be completely sustainable? And for that, the answer really is no. We are very far away there, and much more needs to be done. Firstly, of course, you need to measure emissions, chart a path towards reduction, and reduce your own emissions. And for that, a base year needs to be decided. Additionally, you've got to decide in which order these emissions need to be reduced and develop a plan on how to reach these targets. And then you need to disclose that information. The second bit is, how do you reduce emissions within the supply chain? So it essentially means following the same process for the supply chain, which is mapping out the carbon emissions associated with the supply chain, deciding in which order these emissions need to be reduced, and establishing KRAs for employees. Nothing gets done unless you measure it, unless it's part of the KRA of an employee. And that is something large organizations like Caring are attempting to do, and the framework that I shared with you earlier, which is that everybody, right from the CEO to the person at the lowest end of the value chain and the entry-level employees, need to understand that this is a critical part of doing business and not just something that you start doing because you need to generate a sustainability report. And of course, lastly, we need to disclose value chain emissions. Why do we need to disclose them? Because now, whatever purchases are happening by international buyers, they are asking for this information. They're saying that, what was the carbon footprint of this fabric that we are buying from you? What is the carbon footprint of this particular t-shirt? Because they need to disclose it to their buyers eventually, because consumers are getting much, much more aware of the products that they are looking at. Next, we need to start integrating climate into core business strategy. Updating your vision and mission statement and strategy and processes to reflect your climate commitments. Because if we are doing all this only for a compliance purpose, believe you me, you will be constantly running to actually create those compliance reports. Because there are many, many more compliances that are emerging on a daily basis. So purely doing this for compliance is not necessarily a good strategy. But looking at it as a corporate way of doing business, creating your corporate frameworks and creating a portfolio towards solutions that will help your customers avoid emissions is really what needs to be done. So your climate strategy needs to be compatible with international targets, Indian targets, and those of your buyers. And you need to account for a price on carbon. Very soon, many countries across the world, including the EU, are talking about a carbon tax. So it's not just the price of the product that you will supply to them. They will also start saying, what is the carbon footprint, and converting that into a price. Now, that is going to impact many exporting organizations in very different ways, until and unless you're ready for it and you adapt to it from now on. You also need to look at, how do you influence action in other stakeholders? Obviously, you do not exist in isolation. There are suppliers who supply products and services to you as well. And you need to be able to account for their carbon footprint as well. So how can you influence local and national policies? How do you integrate this within the value chain? And how do you look at financial and non-financial investments? That becomes very critical. So there are 4 important things for you to be able to change the system and adopt to the climate change phenomena. Now, there are many, many learning tools that are available. So one of the learning tools that we have for you is called Climate Fit, which is a net zero training platform for SMEs. There is also the books that Professor Utkarsh and I have written, and a whole plethora of case studies. And there are 2 of these which are based on in the textiles and fashion business. One is Birla Cellulose, the other is Wellspun. You can take a look at those case studies on the HBR website. You can also pick up our books and learn from them. And you can log into Climate Fit and get a in-depth perspective as well as tools on what you can do to start your climate journey. I'll actually pass this thing baton on to Professor Utkarsh Majmudar, who will explain things in much more detail around creating a baseline and what are the things that you need to do to look at carbon within your value chain. Thank you so much. Utkarsh, over to you.
So thank you, Namrata. So Namrata has given you the context. I will take you more through the metrics and strategy. So although she has talked a little bit about strategy, but we will look at how do you build a strategy for a company uh, in order to be in the net zero, uh, or at least be climate ready. So those are things that we will look at. There are also a lot of terms that Namrata has thrown around. Some of you may be familiar with them, some of you may not be familiar with them. So I will probably explain a few of those to you as well. Uh, so let's start. So we talk of ESG. Uh, now, where does ESG come from? And ESG is one of the 6-7 things that Namrata had outlined for you, different terms. But let's look at ESG a little closely, because that's in some sense has been the flavor of the day for quite some time now. Uh, okay. So here you look at three things: environmental impact, which captures things like energy efficiency, carbon footprints, greenhouse gas emissions, deforestations, etc. Anything to do with environment uh, gets focused under environmental. Societal looks at things like labor standards, wages and benefits, workplace uh, diversity, essentially looking at society and community as a whole. Okay. So you look at the environment, uh, you look at the society, and then finally you look at governance. Now, governance in ESG is slightly different from the way we normally understand governance. Here it is the governance for both E and S, which is environment and society. So one has to be careful when sort of looking at ESG. Now, ESG is a good framework to look at because this gives you all the things that you need to do in order to be sustainable. ESG is also often seen as a risk management tool. The risk that a company faces comes from either the environment or from the society. And there are various examples that one can think of. Let's say, take, for example, an oil spill that occurs. That's an environmental issue, and that becomes important, and shareholders and other stakeholders take note of that. Societal issues are equally important, because if you don't take care of your community, your employees, community, or all your stakeholders, then you could be in trouble. And in order to do both these, you need governance. So ESG in that sense can be seen as a risk tool to try and reduce the risk that we face. Now, who all needs to do all this? Yeah, we talked of E, S, and G. And where do they come from? They come from all parts of the business. So operations will have a mix of environmental and social issues. R&D can help you build better and more sustainable products. Procurement, right? The materials that you procure, are they procured in a sustainable way? And are the materials themselves sustainable? Leadership and management again becomes important, because it's the leadership that drives everything else in the company. So if the leadership has a climate mindset, then rest of the things often follow. PR. If you're sustainable and you do well, and if you're able to communicate it to your consumers, then the consumers are more likely to buy your products. That's what Namrata had and mentioned it, that buyers are becoming more smart, more aware, and more climate friendly. And hence, good PR often helps. It also helps in marketing, because somewhat similar thought process that look, if your products are green and sustainable, the consumers will get more attracted to them. Finance is a critical element. I myself come from finance background, and I realize the importance of this. It's important mainly because a lot of this work needs money, lots of money, and finance needs to prioritize the money, right? So unless the finance department are sensitized to climate issues, they will not prioritize money for climate issues. So literally every part of the business has to worry about climate, right? Uh, we also looked at we will be talking about, and we sort of raised the issue about measurements. Each of these lines of business or each of these activities in a business uh, will have different metrics that one can look at and focus on. So the KRS that Namrata was talking about will essentially come from there, and from there it builds into a complete strategy, and we'll sort of talk about it in just a bit. We're looking at the climate fit model, and we'll discuss it somewhat briefly today. Maybe in a later session, we'll get more in depth into it. First is climate strategy and governance. Things always start from the top, right? How can my business model support my climate goals? So first thing is to have climate goals, and then have the business structure and processes that support your climate goal. And unless you do that, making any climate system work is extremely difficult. Then we move down and look at how can I lower my company's climate impacts and increase efficiency. So look at each part of your operation and try and see where I can bring about changes that can help reduce my emissions. Yeah. Either reduce emissions or become more energy efficient, whichever way one looks at it. Reducing emissions in your supply chain is not just good enough to reduce your own emissions, everything is good. It's your supply chain which has the maximum amount of emissions, and one needs to look at the supply chain also closely. You need to design yourself for net zero. We'll understand what net zero is in just a bit. So how can I design more sustainable products? How can I ensure that my products themselves are net zero? And like I said, financing is critical. How do I prioritize climate investments and evaluate financial impacts? Now, unlike other financial projects that come up, which are a simple NPV. So a positive NPV, you accept the project, otherwise you reject the project. The metrics around net zero projects are really difficult to quantify, and that makes it so much more difficult to evaluate those projects. Engaging your people and communities. So what do these mean to me, my employees, my communities, and how do I sort of engage them to make sure that my plans work out? And finally is the net zero storytelling, in which case you are really telling what you have done, right? And Namrata said that it is important for you to communicate what you have done. Right? Your brand becomes more valuable if you communicate your sustainability or your climate story. So we've been talking about net zero. So what exactly is net zero? So let's understand this, because this is a somewhat confusing term. All factories that manufacture products typically emit different types of gases. Collectively, they are called the greenhouse gases. Now, factories all over the world emit greenhouse gases. The trouble with greenhouse gases is they create a layer in the atmosphere which traps the heat and makes the earth warmer, right? And which has negative consequences on our weather climates. So for instance, if you look at Delhi today, Delhi or northern India, that there have been rains and that there are jokes going around that Delhi has all 3 seasons rolled in one as of today. But that's the outcome of all this carbon that is getting captured. So aim is to reduce the amount of these greenhouse gases that are present in the atmosphere so that the heat that is getting trapped reduces. So from a global perspective, what we want is we should take out exactly as much carbon as we emit. Yeah. So that's a global target, which will keep our temperatures at constant levels. However, from a company's perspective, we look at the emissions caused by the company, less the credits for carbon, which I'll explain in just a bit. So credit for carbon reduction and carbon reduction activities. So net emissions are this. If net emissions are 0, then we say it is net 0. One has to be slightly careful with terminology here. And there are various terms. So for instance, some companies call themselves carbon neutral. And carbon neutrality is nothing but the emissions caused minus the carbon credits. We'll be able to talk about the carbon credits in just a bit. That is carbon neutrality, not to be confused with net zero, which is carbon credits and carbon reduction efforts together. So that's the equation that we are sort of looking at. So we want this equation to be 0. That's our end objective. So I said greenhouse gases. Now, greenhouse gases are collectively called CO2 equivalent or CO2e. Now, what is CO2e? Now, there are various kinds of greenhouse gases. There are 3 main types of greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. But they're not all same. You can't add them because otherwise it would be an apples to oranges comparison. So what IPCC does is to provide what are known as conversion factors. Right? So everything is converted into terms of carbon dioxide. So you will see that the conversion factor for carbon dioxide is exactly 1. So everything is in terms of carbon dioxide. So 28 units of methane is equal to 1 unit of carbon dioxide. 265 units of nitrous oxide is equal to 1 unit of carbon dioxide. And whatever our emissions are, say there are 250 units of carbon dioxide emissions, 475 of methane, 125 of nitrous oxide. You multiply the 2, add it up, you get the total GHG emissions. GHG emissions are typically marked in terms of metric tons. Sometimes we want to compare across the industry. So we may say we have to probably divide it by some measures so as to normalize the metric. So here we are looking at, say, an annual production of textile, for example, 2,000 square meter. So the GHG emission per square meter becomes this. In case of garments, the normalizing factor may be the number of pieces produced. There are different metrics. And all this helps us in sort of comparing. So in 2022, India's per capita CO2 emission was 1.9 tons, whereas for United States, it was 15.52. Now we are able to compare. And this comparison is very helpful. We'll also look at how this works in terms of measurement later on. We've been talking about carbon tax, carbon market, and carbon credits. Right. The first thing to understand is what is carbon credit. A carbon credit works on a very simple principle. Say in a particular industry, the government puts up a carbon budget. You will not emit more than, say, 200 tons of CO2e. Now, some will emit more, some will emit less. And those who emit less get credit, and these credits can be sold in the market. Right? So those who emit more use these credits to offset the extra that they have been emitting. That's your carbon credit. Sometimes governments also impose what is known as a carbon tax. This is nothing but a tax which is imposed on the amount of carbon that you emit. Right? So if you emit more, your product effectively becomes more expensive, and hence there is an incentive for you to reduce your emission. Thirdly, you have something called a carbon offset. So if you invest in carbon storage, you buy a plot of land and create a forest there, which will take in and reduce carbon dioxide. That's a carbon offset. So that's another term that is often used. So you have carbon credits, you have a carbon tax, and you have the carbon offset. Now, these CO2 emissions have to be reported in 3 different ways. One is what is known as the scope 1 emission. Scope 1 emission is anything that you do within your factory, that is your scope 1 emission, and that is to be reported separately. Scope 2 emission, on the other hand, is any electricity or power that you purchase or procure, although it is not within the factory, but it is being used in the factory, and hence that is something that also needs to be measured. So scope 1 is within factory. Scope 2 is the power that you purchase. That together is something that needs to be reported mandatorily. Then you have scope 3 emissions, which is the emissions in your entire value chain. So like I said, it's not enough for you to reduce your own emission. It's also to help others reduce their emissions. Scope 3 emission reporting right now is not mandatory, but still a lot of companies do report. And since they work on scope 3 emission, they also report the scope 3 emissions. Yeah. So the measurement that starts with looking at carbon dioxide emission moves on and is segregated into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions out here. Okay. One of the key things that we said that you need to reduce your energy intensity. Yeah. So what is the energy that you're using? How intensely you are using? So what is energy use intensity? The energy that you use divided by some measure, for example, the area of the factory, or it could be number of products produced, whichever metric that you're using. That gives you your energy intensity. Now, how do I reduce my energy intensity? I have to get an energy audit done, which will find out ways and means whereby I can reduce my energy intensity. You also need to consider the collateral impacts. Right? Can reduction in one system help reduce energy usage in another system? And that's a collateral impact that one is looking at. Right? Calculate the cost of each project or investment that you need to do in order to bring about energy efficiency. You need to rank the investments on the basis of feasibility, size, and profitability. Evaluate your financing options. Where will I get my money from? And that's an important thing, and we'll talk about where does the money come from. And monitor and follow up on implementation. So energy usage gets measured and attempts can be made to reduce energy usage. Also look at two cases. One is the case of Birla Cellulose, which has attempted to do a lot of these things. One is to look at the material itself. Yeah. So by using viscose as a fiber, it is relatively more climate friendly. We will look at the Welspun case also in just a bit. There again, we are looking at the raw materials. So essentially, if you look at this slide, there's across the value chain improvements that are being attempted, either in terms of land use or in terms of the biodiversity impact, or if you're looking at the end of the life of clothing. Yeah. And end of life is actually very critical, because ultimately the products go into a landfill and where they're often incinerated, which will lead to an increase in carbon in the atmosphere. So ways and means have to be devised so that clothes don't land up in the landfill. They are brought back and used. Also look at pre and post consumer waste and try and see what one can do around it. So whole range of actions that Birla Cellulose undertakes that can help reduce emission. This is just to set the stage for the strategy that you need to build. And this will give you a context of the whole range of actions that companies can take in order to reduce their carbon emissions or do better on ESG. The second one is on Welspun. Yeah. Again, you will see actions being taken across the value chain. You start with the farm. Cotton is known to be intensive in the use of water and pesticides. So how do I reduce use of pesticides and water? Growing organic cotton is one such way. And also assure fair prices to your farmers. In the factory, that there can be various actions that you can undertake: water recycling, GHG reduction, energy efficiency, whole host of actions that you can take there, making the workplace safer, diversity and inclusion. Welspun has one plant where all the workers are women. So that's where they add value. And then, of course, since you need to sell your products and certifications become extremely important. So we have an understanding now of one, what is emission, how is it measured, and then what are the companies doing around it. This leads us to look at how do I make myself climate fit. Okay. Now, in order to make yourself climate fit, you need to have a strategy around it. Now, how do I sort of figure out how much climate or how much emission should I have, or how much emission should I reduce? There are a couple of sources of trying to figure that out. One is to see what other players in the industry are doing. So remember, I spoke to you about GHG emission per square meter of cloth, right? So look at your competitors. How much is their energy, CO2 efficiency or CO2 usage, and look at it. The other thing is to look at what kind of targets the government is setting out. So for instance, we talked about Panchamrit, which is the Prime Minister's 5 Ps goal. It says by 2030, renewable energy share in total power production should be about 50%. Right? Currently, the renewable share is around 12%, which means we need an increase of renewable energy usage by 38%. Now, how can that happen? That can happen only if each company in the country increases the use of renewable energy by 38%. Now, that in some sense becomes a target for each company. Now, some will be able to do better, some will be able to do worse, but at least there's a starting point that is available to you. So Panchamrit in some sense can be used as a starting point to understand what you need to do. And also look at what your competitors are doing, what your buyers are demanding of you. So all those sort of become inputs into the kind of strategy that you need to build. You need to embed climate goals within your climate strategy, what we talked about. Identify the business implications. If I'm going to do this, what is the implications on my business? And what do I need to do to make sure that there is no disruption in my business? Define and determine roles, responsibilities, KPIs, and accountability. We all know that without putting out measurements and targets, nothing gets done. So unless that is done, things don't really work out. And you have to build mechanisms whereby you can measure, track, compare against the target, and see how you're doing. That is the base on which you need to start. What will be the climate actions for your operations? How can I reduce my energy efficiency? What renewable energy can I use? Can I adapt business travel? Yeah. So companies are saying, look, we'll use Zoom rather than having people travel all over the world. That's one way of reducing my carbon footprint. Understand common emission sources in offices, commuting, etc. There are a whole range, right? So for instance, if you're using an older fleet of vehicles for transporting your products, you might want to shift to a newer, more efficient fleet of vehicles. Look at waste and emissions and see what can you do about waste and emissions. Identify the GHG hotspots within your supply chain. We look at supply chain. We also want to look at the low-hanging fruit. Where is the GHG emission highest in my value chain? And how can I pick it up and reduce it? Incorporate climate considerations into procurement, something I already spoke about. Bring suppliers on board. So not only do you have to be net zero, it's your suppliers who also have to be net zero. Now, suppliers typically are deficient in two things. One is technology and the other is finance. So if you are a larger company, you can support a smaller company by helping them on the two fronts. And finally, optimize logistics to reduce emissions, something that I just talked about. Design for net zero. What kind of a organization structure and what kind of a product life cycle that I can create so that I can achieve a net zero target. Right? And there your measurements actually come into play, right? So all your GHG emissions, where all the GHG emissions are taking place, at what point in time, uh, and where I can reduce, that becomes extremely important. Mm. Try and figure out if you can have better material choices. Sometimes material choices themselves reduce the amount of carbon emission. And finally, design for performance. Financing net zero transition is extremely critical. Now, where does money come from? And that is an important issue that I said that I'll sort of raise. But first, you have to make a business case uh, for climate. Once you make a business case for climate, uh, and you get approval, you have to figure out a way in which you can sell your business plan. It's may often not be straight NPV IRR kind of story, uh, but there are benefits which are not so straightforward, but need to be factored in. Then the final issue is about funding. You need money to undertake these projects. Money typically comes from very many sources. One could be grants that somebody might give you. There are climate-linked funding options like sustainability bonds or sustainability-linked bonds, which are available. And these are all forms of debt that you can use. Then there are equity sources of financing, which you can go to the market and raise equity for your sustainable actions. And equity holders are now becoming much more sensitive and concerned about these actions, and they're willing to support them. Apart from these, you have subsidies from government, etc., which you can utilize. Engaging people and communities, you can't get anything done without engaging people and communities. So once you do that, then you become, that helps you a lot. And final step is understand who your audience is to have the net zero storytelling. Align stories with your business mission and vision. So this is my business vision. This is what I did. This was the outcome. And this is a nice story that you can tell people. And this will help you raise your sustainability credentials to a far higher degree than what it would be now. So that's it from my side. And Namrata, if you want to add anything, please feel free. Otherwise, we'll open the floor to questions maybe.
Thank you so much, Utkarsh. This was great. I'd like to invite Chandrama as well, so that, if she has any questions or thoughts to share.
Thanks, Professor Utkarsh and Ms. Rana. I think it was a good basic introduction to what you should do. So, Professor Utkarsh, that was good. Though maybe I'm a layman, would want to know more about how to initiate a benchmark of where we are, and also on the financing bit of it. But before that, I would like to invite one or two of our members who have initiated this journey, and as we would also like to use this platform to share that what their experience has been, and in case they have any challenges. Can I call Mr. Ramakrishna Sabari Girish, who is the head of sustainability at Sulochana Cotton Spinning Mills Limited? Sulochana has been deeply engaged in circularity, and I think it'll be good to know what they're doing in this space. So, Mr. Girish, are you there?
Hi, Chandrima. Yep. Yeah. So, as Chandrima told, we have already into this space of sustainability and capturing all the ESG points. So we work on a SaaS-based system where all these credentials are input, and it reflects as different reports formats. It might be a GRI or CDP, TCFD, BRSR, and even the SDG ones. So we have already started this particular journey last year, and this is our first reporting year. And prior to that, we are already into the space of measuring our carbon footprint. So let it be on the process or on the product. Both the places we have already started working on capturing all these values, and we have done a life cycle assessment on our process, which has already evidenced we are 94.85% carbon neutral right now. And our target is to be totally carbon neutral by 2027, which is 43 years ahead of our own country. And the other side is with the LCA on our products. We are the first one to do the life cycle assessment on recycled polyester fiber, dope dyed. And yeah, before that, I just want to tell you something also. We recycle 7 million PET bottles every day into polyester fiber. And that fiber is dyed without single drop of water. So that way we save around 9 million liters of water every day. So all these things were counted, and the report, what we got was highly impactful. Like we were saving 96% on carbon emission, 78% on energy, and 99% on water. So we didn't stop there. We also did the life cycle assessment on recycled cotton also, where we also did the combinations of different blends of recycled cotton and polyester, which is where we have evidenced a great environmental savings on these three things. And the other side is we work constant, and here I want to again tell we are 100% into renewable energy. 94% comes from windmill, and 6% comes from solar. And all these solar panels, whatever we have installed, the solar panels are manufactured by us. So we think like I always believe sustainability is something is not something which has been compelled upon you. Instead, it needs to be a sort of an inherent thing within you, which you have to spontaneously come out and just start implying on each and every smallest part of it. So one crazy thing here, I just want to point out. 4 years before, we thought because it's a 300-acre campus, and we thought, okay, we have a lot of grass, and we were using electric grass cutters. So we thought, why can't we just substitute this electric grass cutters with goats? So we bought 40 goats to graze all the grass. And now we have around 360 goats, and we have stopped usage of grass cutters totally. So that smallest part of the electricity also, we just think of saving it. So this happens only when you have a sort of an insight with you to go towards the energy saving or like reduction of carbon or whatever it is. So it has to be something like inherently you have to do something by yourself instead of someone instigating you to do it, or just for the sake of getting an entry into a brand. If at all you start doing that, that might not be something which is you are doing wholeheartedly. So whenever you do something of your own, you do it wholeheartedly, and you definitely achieve the results. And here what happens is, it is not only like if you might be keeping on doing, but to tell the world, you have to measure, and you have to keep the right numbers, where it has been already, the numbers whatever you are getting is already vetted by a credible third party. So likewise, we have already got the process LCA, and also the product LCA got been assessed by world-renowned assessors, LCA assessors. And I always believe that sustainability is no more a choice. We have to be on this particular journey, like whatever, we cannot take anything people what are being told on the climate and everything. We have to take it very seriously. And Sulochana is also a part of Carbon Plus consortium, which is formed by the Textile Exchange, which is covering 40 leading brands and suppliers across the world to reduce 1.5 degree by 2030 in the textile value chain. So we are also into the BAG, which is Biodiversity Advisory Group. And this is the 4th year we are accounting CFMB, that is the Corporate Fiber and Materials Benchmarking. So every year we just keep on just entering all our fibers and materials, whatever we procure, and which shows us from between year to year how we have progressed on migrating to the sustainable fiber or sustainable products. So these are the smallest glimpses of whatever we do. And thank you, Chandrima, for this opportunity. And I could see always only Birlas and other peoples are being mentioned, where people like us who have done all these things are never been mentioned. But the other side is they might not be knowing. So that is one reason I would just request these things to be discussed, not to promote Sulochana, but at least it would just instigate someone to start this particular journey towards sustainability. Thank you. Thanks for opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Girish. I think one of the reasons that you usually refer to the bigger people is also because they do a lot of reporting and ensure a lot of visibility of their initiatives. And as Professor Utkarsh also mentioned, so that storytelling part is also important. So thanks for joining.
We are putting it across wherever possible forums, and it is very clearly evident on our websites. So we just
Wonderful.
clearly mention each and every smallest part of it. We are just putting it publicly. Yeah, we are creating the visibility, and we have started making the noise.
No, and in fact, CITI would be very happy to provide all possible platforms for more visibility of these initiatives, because you all are leading the peer group more than the bigger people, because obviously people relate more to the initiatives by the relatively medium-sized units.
Yep. Thank you.
So Namrata ji, next time examples from this from Sulochana and their likes. In fact, CITI has a host of other units who had applied for the CITI awards. We'll share that. Do incorporate those examples also in your presentations.
Certainly would love to, Chandrima. In fact, before the next session, we'd love to speak to some more organizations and understand their journey around sustainability.
Sure, thanks. May I request Mr. Subhashish Banerjee, who is the head of sustainability and at Landmark Group, Dubai. Subhashish ji, you're there. If you would like to share something on the journey that your organization has taken.
Hi, Chandrima. Yeah, thanks. It's a wonderful initiative by CITI, and I've listened to the previous speakers. So it's a wonderful platform being created by CITI and the like-minded people for promoting the entire sustainability journey across the Indian textile value chain. Now, I'd like to bring some focus from the brands and retailers perspective. Landmark Group, I believe most of the people they're aware of, we're one of the biggest retailers in India, Middle East, Southeast Asia, around 3,000 stores and a significant presence across the e-com platforms. So with that, a big kind of a footprint and with a huge amount of brands and the categories in our portfolio, sustainability is one of the biggest priorities for the Landmark Group for promoting across our supply chain. Now, looking from India as a sourcing perspective for Landmark, we source heavily. India is one of the, I think, second or third biggest sourcing destination for us in terms of apparel product categories. And recently, there has been a CIPA agreement, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between India and UAE, which has been signed. We see a lot of traction around it, and a lot of suppliers from India is getting onboarded into that whole CIPA framework, which the Indian government has recently signed with the UAE government. And that gives us a huge opportunity for further increasing of the sourcing from India. So from that perspective, India holds a very, very bright future in terms of products being further being procured from that particular area. Now, with that comes along the sustainability, which is the huge, I mean, the talk of the town. Many of the retailers like Landmark, we have already started the journey. As a country here, the COP28, which is happening in Abu Dhabi. So there's a huge focus around sustainability in this part of the world. So in relation to that, as a retailer, we have also drafted our entire sustainability policy, which is being driven across our value chain, the supply chain partners, primarily the suppliers, which revolves around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So our sustainability framework is also revolving around that similar platform, with people, product, and planet being the three major focus areas, where people primarily on the social activities which you have already partnered with the agencies, which is being rolled out across the social standards across the supply basis. On the products, which is a bit technical on the side, like the Detox to Zero, like ZDAC, all those platforms we are subscribed to, like the BCI, Better Control Initiatives. So those are the things which the programs which have been running across our suppliers for quite a couple of years now. And on the planet side, we are working with the shipping liners like Maersk, the world's biggest shipping liner and we're investing on the green fuel technology as well. So if I talk about the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, which is the part of the reporting norms in the sustainability value chain, scope 3 for a retailer is the biggest source of the carbon in terms of the reporting. Around 60 to 65% carbon comes from the scope 3 activities. And that's why it's being heavily focused by Landmark in developing the entire scope 3 reporting structure, the framework, the knowledge disseminations. We're working with the global partners in terms of understanding our suppliers, what to be done. And we are creating a next 5 years journey in terms of developing the whole supply basis to a reporting format where you report clearly scope 1, 2, and 3 with the measured targets and the improvement areas. So that's how the entire sustainability framework and Landmark has been developed. Now, in terms of the areas where we still working with the various authorities, like in the countries, the sourcing countries like China, like the United States, like the European countries, where things are more clear in terms of the visibility, and you can clearly see whether the sustainability claims are a mere greenwashing kind of, or it is more of a measurable metrics by which you can identify. With Indian partners, we wanted to understand how the journey is looking forward, like the platform like CITI, how the policy is getting shaped up, what are the measurable metrics by which we can understand the suppliers' claims are very validated, transparent, and accountable, so that when you publish a CSR kind of report globally to the investors, it's very backed up by the evidence and science and facts. So that's the area I'm looking forward in terms of partnering with the agencies, with the institutions, with the authorities, with the ministries and the council, to understand a bit more on that area, so that we can also incorporate that into our whole supply chain. Thank you. Thanks, Chandriva, and the entire panel here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Anyone else has any comments or any questions on the presentations today? In case there is no further questions, we would like to close the session today. As we said initially, this is the first of a series. Of course, we would like to get into more details on how to establish benchmarks for your organization, how to have a more quality reporting of the ESG metrics. We may subsequently also invite policymakers to understand what are the schemes for financing for the ESG initiatives. So any other areas where you think there is scope for discussion and thus better building the roads for the ESG initiatives, do let us know. We'll get into those areas. With that, I thank everyone. Namrata ji, Utkarsh ji, any final comments?
Thank you so much, Chandrima, for having me. And I'm delighted to hear from Girish and Subhashish on their own personal journeys and their organization, what they are doing. And I really wish that, this momentum spreads to other organizations as well. And we can look at this series as a learning platform for everybody, irrespective of their journeys, where they are, even if they are beginning it, they are in the middle, or they think that they've completed whatever they set out to do. We'd love to hear from many more people. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone. Please
Yep.
to be connected. We'll be sending out mailers. We'll be calling in more experts, industry people, and policymakers as we go along. Thanks everybody for joining in. Thank you.